And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watermark's webinar, Successfully Managing Challenging or Difficult People, One Opportunity at a Time, with Marvell Allen. I'm Mary Thorsby, Vice President of Marketing and Events for Watermark. We're thrilled to have you with us today. It's Wednesday, August 2nd, and this is our 9th webinar for 2017. If you've missed our earlier ones, you'll find them on our website, wearewatermark.org. We're recording today's webinar so that we can add it to our website later this afternoon. I will send each of you an email with the link and the password to this recording, and you can revisit it at any time. Just a couple of notes. If your phone and laptop aren't on mute, please take a second and mute them both. And if you have a question for Marvell, and we hope you do, please ask her lots and lots of questions. You can use the chat box. It's in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, or sometimes it's in the lower right-hand corner, depending on your system. Make sure you select host and presenter and type in your question, and that way Marvell and I will get them. And she'll answer them at the end. Be sure to use the chat box. I noticed the Q&A box is not responding today. I'm not sure quite why. So make sure that you use the chat so that we get your questions. Watermark, as many of you know, is a community of professional women who come together to connect, develop, and advocate for the advancement of women in the workforce. Our mission is to increase the number of women in leadership positions. And that, of course, requires knowing how to work with all sorts of interesting personalities that I know Marvell will be telling us about today. Marvell will share her expertise. We'll have time for a Q&A. And then I will tell you about a few upcoming Watermark events that I know you'll be interested in. I'm very happy to introduce Marvell Allen, Principal Consultant and Certified Coach in Leadership and Talent Management, as well as career management for her company, Millennium Career Advantage. Marvell is a leadership development expert and coach among her many clients, Twitter, LinkedIn, Genentech, Hewlett-Packard, SanDisk, and many more. She is a frequent facilitator of our Watermark workshops, which we deliver regularly to corporate campuses. And I know many of you have participated in her workshop on organizational change, as I have. She's absolutely brilliant and very engaging, so I know that you will enjoy her today. So with that, Marvell, I'm going to forward the slide, and I'm going to hand off the ball to you. It will take just a second. And let's see. You've got it. So I invite you to take it away.
All right, Mary. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope that this information that we're going to go through this morning gives all of you just a little bit of an overview about how we can successfully manage our relationships with difficult or challenging people. And again, I just want to remind you that this is an overview, so I hope that you will find 2 or 3 tidbits that you can take away and begin to use right away, or at least begin to have the additional dialogue with your colleagues and both up and down the organization, have this conversation with your colleagues about what you can do in order to make your workplaces much more agreeable and successful. So we're going to take a look at a few topics, and I want to first give you a quote that's one of my favorites, and I've seen it a lot of different places, sometimes done a little bit differently, but be thankful for all the difficult people in your life and learn from them. They have shown you exactly who you do not want to be. So there's a little bit of wry humor here, but I also want you to consider that throughout our discussions this morning in this brief time that we have together, I want you to also consider that sometimes we ourselves are those difficult people, and we ourselves are giving challenges to others. So I do want you to consider that and keep an open mind as you look at ways that we might begin to really support our colleagues with our own behavior. So just a couple of brief things about what we'll cover, hopefully cover in the time we have together. We'll look at a little bit of understanding the reasons for difficult or challenging behavior. I want you to think about that as we're going through the slides, because we all know people who have been difficult or challenging, but we're not always clear about their reasons. We are very good at superimposing our own perspective about that behavior. So that's why we want to make sure that we keep an open mind about this. We'll also talk a little bit about why it's important to focus on solutions and not the person, the challenges that we face with personalizing the behavior of others, and then having it disintegrate into an area where we can't even resolve or make right any of the situations that happen to us. And then thirdly, we'll take a little bit of a look at using a model that I absolutely love in terms of being able to reduce tensions in a constructive way by using the issue impact model. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but I'll give you a couple of examples about how it can work. And then lastly, the importance of active listening, ongoing communication, and feedback. And I think one of the things that I want to make sure I mention to you in terms of feedback is that oftentimes we believe that feedback needs to be negative, or we're always giving negative feedback to the person regarding their behavior. From my perspective, having done a lot of work with strength finders and the whole strategy of looking at people's strengths before we look at the things that they're not doing well, this feedback has the opportunity to be both positive, engaging, as well as constructive. Here are the things we need to have changed in terms of that behavior. So I want you to think about that as we go a little bit further as well. So let's just look at a few of some of the reasons. I mean, we could take a whole day. This program can really be done in a whole day or longer to take a look at some of the reasons that we have challenging behavior with people that are in our orbit. By the way, this happens at home. It happens in our social circle, so it's not just a workplace issue. But there might be environmental issues that can cause this kind of behavior, whether it's at home, whether it's issues that are dealt with in terms of the changes in the workplace, changes in our own positions, etc. And they can contribute to this. So I want you to just think about what kinds of environmental issues might cause challenging or difficult behavior. And then what are the things that we tell ourselves, our own thoughts and feelings? Remember, sometimes we are our own worst enemies, but at the same time we do a lot of self-talk that is not always positive. So there are those areas as well. And then things others say to us or impose on us can also have a real challenging effect on us, which may cause our own behavior to be challenging. And so we need to think about, A, what are those areas that we do the self-talk that sometimes can be negative and not productive? And then B, what are those areas that we are concerned about because others either superimpose or put their own perspective on it? This is particularly true when we're looking at situations where we have difficult people that might be perceived as bullies or negative, always have something negative to say as opposed to positive and reinforcing. And then what are the standards of conduct that are expected in the team and the group? It's incumbent upon all of us to be very clear and to get clarity around what those standards of conduct are, and to be comfortable to call people in a very respectful way on their conduct when it's not appropriate for the group. So oftentimes we let these things go, they simmer, because we're not sure how to bring them up to others. And then when personal needs are not met, for example, I may have expected that promotion or expected that bigger cubicle, but instead now I'm sharing a cubicle with 15 other people. Sometimes it's difficult for me to be able to talk about those personal needs that are not met. What about our attitudes? Remember, our attitudes are always involved in what has shaped us from the beginning of our lives until where we are now in terms of our professional lives and experiences. And then what about our values? These are things that we often live by and we don't compromise on. But if we're not having dialogue about what's important to us, it's very easy for others to either misunderstand, and it's also easy for us to miscommunicate. And then our self-esteem plays a huge part in this that we need to be very, very clear about. So that negative and critical behavior and the messages that we need to think about, we need to be very, very clear about what that looks like. Okay. So in this next slide that I'm showing you, it's really important. I don't know how many of you know about the iceberg model that we have. And it's really important that you consider the iceberg model from the standpoint of looking at it in this pyramid shape and then thinking about what do we know that's above the surface and what do we know that's below the surface in terms of our relationships with others. So oftentimes those issues come up in front, and underneath the surface, we have to deal with other things. For example, the personalities of people, emotions, the interests and needs and desires, oftentimes which we do not pay attention to because what we're interested in is getting the work done. We're interested in people communicating with us. We become more interested in that, and as a result, there are things that can slip through the cracks on this particular area. So the importance of understanding what is below the surface becomes really important, and not only with the people that are in our orbit, but also for ourselves. And let me just take a quick moment to apologize for the doorbell ringing. I didn't realize that was going to happen, but thank you for your patience. Hopefully this becomes a little bit clearer as we go further, but this last part of the pyramid that I want you to take a look at, the awareness of interconnection, each one of these areas becomes very, very interconnected. And if we're not paying attention to where we have impact with others and their behavior, it becomes very difficult to mitigate that behavior. So what about the challenges that we may have in teams? I think that for the most part, most of us have to interact with others in the work that we're doing. And in a team situation, both the teams and the leaders and the team members themselves need to be actively engaged in making sure that the team norms are adhered to, for example. Because not only conflict can rise, as we saw in some of the areas with the iceberg model, but we can also have challenges with just our effectiveness in getting the work done. So this discussion here about looking at some of the challenging people that we might have to deal with in teams, one of the biggest issues is that second bullet, that they often withhold or reduce the effort toward the team. And depending on the direction that the team is going, how busy they are, the importance of the project or the initiative that they're working on, it's very, very difficult to move forward if, in fact, we've got people that are withholding their effort in order to make the team successful. Often teams are also seen as having, particularly if they're challenging people, having a negative influence over the team direction and the goals. Work stoppage, the challenge of not getting all of their commitments taken care of can oftentimes be an area where people are concerned in teams. But if they're also ignoring the team norms with disruptive behavior, it becomes another challenge as well. And one of the areas that I wanted to make sure that you all consider is to what extent are you all willing to put in the sweat equity to make sure that the entire team is committed to what the goal is, but that you're also willing to be transparent and upfront with how you're going to handle these kinds of challenging situations, and doing so in a respectful and supportive way, because the ability for you to have integrity and build trust, even in spite of challenges, is a very, very critical part of your success in a team environment. So I just want to take a quick pause, if it's all right, Mary, and see if anyone has any burning questions that they need to ask before we move on to the issue impact model.
Yes, if there are questions, just use the chat box, and I will keep a lookout for them.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about the issue impact model. Not sure how many of you have heard about this model, but what I like about it is it allows us, whether you are a team leader or a manager or supervisor, or just in terms of your team project or initiative, that you're the one who has ultimate responsibility. The issue impact model allows us to step back a bit and really be sensitive to the fact that we want to really reduce our own sense of emotions around areas that could be challenging before we dive into supporting someone else. Because remember, part of our biggest opportunity, we believe, is we jump to conclusions, we become very reactive with these situations, and it really just continues to escalate instead of creating the kind of environment that we want to reduce and mitigate any of these areas. So with the issue impact model, what it allows you to do is succinctly describe the issues, explain the impact of what that behavior or the areas that that person or persons are doing that might have a negative connotation or negative impact. It allows you to describe the new and expected behavior that you're looking for. And by the way, please don't just think that this is for managers to direct reports or leaders to subordinates. This is also a model that works well with peers. And the reason it does is because you can move away from your positional power and create an opportunity for the two of you to dialogue in a very equal way about what your expectations are in terms of your joint behaviors. So it also allows you to ask for commitment to the new behavior. And again, your ability to, and sometimes practice this issue impact model so you know what you want to say, how you want it to come across when you're having the dialogue with the colleagues that you need to have it with. And or even in our personal lives, sometimes we need to have the same kind of dialogue. And then agree upon the measurement of success that you both are looking for. And set consequences where necessary. And this discussion about setting consequences where necessary is really important if you happen to be a supervisor or a manager, but it also can be important at the peer level. For example, if you're working on a team project and you and another colleague are the ones that are responsible, for example, the financial reporting, there's a consequence that you can state vis-a-vis the peer work that you're doing that might impact the success of that project. Oftentimes, though, it's looked at primarily between managers and leaders, and they just want to make sure that the persons they're talking to with the challenging behavior are clear that there could be consequences. Those consequences can be anything from projects don't go well, several times, I'm making an example now, several times you've been late with this project, I may have to pull you off and put you on something else. Be clear what those consequences are going to look like and make sure that the people you're talking to understand what the consequences are. So let me just give you a little bit of an example of the issue impact model. And it's not, I did not include the examples in the slide deck, but I'll just give you an idea of what it could look like. So under that first bullet, succinctly describe the issue. It's important that you do a little bit of non-judgmental write down and practice of what it is that you want to let people know about the issue. And then make sure you're describing it exactly as it needs to be said. Maintain good eye contact with them. Really let them know that you're focused on the discussion at hand. And then here might be an example that you could use. So you could say something like, Martha, I have observed you coming to work at 9:30 each day, and the start of the day is at 8 o'clock. So it's not yelling, screaming, being emotional or anything like that. It's just succinctly describing what the issue is. And then in explaining the impact of the behavior, An example is, and remember, this impact is not only the impact on the team. Be very clear that it's also impact on that employee that you're talking to, but it could also have impact on the organization. And if you happen to be a manager or a supervisor, there's impact on you as well, okay? So an example of that discussion might be, the impact of this behavior, Martha, is that it is detrimental to your performance and credibility, harmful to the team morale, and as your manager, places me in a difficult situation. Again, good eye contact, totally focused on the discussion at hand with the appropriate voice tone without it being disrespectful. And then the third one, describe the new expected behavior. You need to let them know what that behavior looks like in tangible terms so that they're very clear and confirm that they're clear about it. So maybe an example of that might be, what I'd like to see you do is to make an effort to be here at 8 o'clock each morning. That's describing what it is you're looking for. And then you also need to ask for their commitment. You need to make sure that if you're a manager or supervisor, you use an authoritative tone, but not one that's overly so or puts them on the defensive. But again, this is where that commitment comes in the question for commitment. Can I get, excuse me, can I get your commitment to be here at 8 each morning? Clearly it's a yes, no. However, if they can say, well, there's actually some challenges with that, you need to be open to hearing what they are so that you can come to an agreement on what it's going to look like. Provide some measure of terms of success for that person that you might be talking to. By the way, including if it's a peer that you're concerned about not getting their portion of the work done. This could work very similarly for them as well. I want you to check in with me each morning this week. Is that okay? If it's a peer situation, hey, before we go to the staff meeting next week, let's have a conversation together to make sure that we're on the same page. You can use it the same way in either situation, but I think the whole point of the discussion of the issue impact model is just to make sure that you have a way of diffusing some of the challenges that might be there with a process that allows you to get at what maybe some of that challenging behavior might be. Okay? And then when we talk about active listening, one key point I want to bring up here with active listening, ongoing communication, and feedback. I absolutely agree with you after all of my many years in the corporate world that sometimes we are terribly distracted, very irritated, very upset with bosses, colleagues, leaders, challenges at our family. It's very difficult to actively listen and to maintain ongoing communication and, quite frankly, to give the kind of feedback that we probably believe others need. But it is very critical that you assess your own ability to flex and adapt to different situations that might be happening to you in the workplace and or because of a home situation might be spilling over into the workplace. So with active listening, it's very important that you're ready to listen and focus on the issue at hand. That means if you're having a meeting with someone, if you need to, if you're a manager or a leader, have that meeting in a neutral place so that you don't put the person in a position to have to be on the defensive and or believe they can't win the situation because you have positional power over them. Neutrality allows that to kind of fade away enough for you to get some of the points out that you want to. Secondly, it's important that you listen for facts and feelings while suspending judgment and analysis. Earlier, we talked about the importance of really understanding what it is that, why it's important to focus on solutions rather than the person, because it's very easy for emotions to escalate. And it's important for you to be open and really suspend that judgment and really recognize what are my own issues relative to this person's behavior and the fact that they're challenging all the time. What is it about that I need to really observe in myself and make sure that I'm being open enough with this person? And then if you are having that dialogue, as we talked about in the issue impact model, it's okay to restate what you heard in the event that that you misinterpreted what was said to you, so that you give the other person the opportunity to clarify. But then be aware of any obstacles to listen actively. You need to make sure that there is no phone, that there is no email, that there is no distraction, that there are no distractions that you could be tempted to take care of, because all that does is show the other person that there is not as much value and support for them as you maintain that there was. And then you also need to assess those attitudes and motivations that they might have, non-judgmentally. And then again, turn back to yourself. Are these attitudes and motivations upsetting me because it was never anything that I would do, and I'm struggling now to give this person the feedback or to be supportive of them as they need? And then in terms of feedback, I really believe that feedback is a two-way tool that has to start with some positive discussion and dialogue, because it's easy for it to disintegrate into negative, into literally cutting off the opportunity to find solutions if it's not looked at both ways. So if there are areas where you and a colleague or your team is doing well, talk about those things first before you go into areas where you need to see some change or you need to see behaviors turn to a more positive. And it's also critical that all of you work toward solutions and be clear that you come back to those solutions to remind yourself and others what you committed to. This all comes from my perspective of making sure that there's honesty, a respectful, trusting way that you're looking to gain commitments for any of these behavior changes. And again, while it's easy for us to talk about behavior change in terms of performance management in organizations, when it comes time to your once a year or twice a year performance evaluations, this may or may not change what that behavior is if we don't know what some of those underlying issues are. So again, it's important for you to flex and be adaptable to understand what some of those different behaviors and why they're coming up the way they are. Part of what I believe, and I try to live this belief myself, and again, one of the biggest challenges, whether I'm working with clients or when I was in several corporate organizations like Marriott or the Federal Reserve Bank or some of the others that Mary mentioned earlier, one of the biggest challenges for all of us is our ability to really be self-aware. And for those of you that have done any work with emotional intelligence, you understand that that's the pillar of being an emotionally intelligent employee, leader, person in your organizations, but also in support of family, friends, and other colleagues. So that self-awareness and your ability to reflect on your strength in self-awareness becomes very, very important. And then I coupled it with the active listening, which we've talked about already a little bit already, is that we need to be able to suspend that judgment, put ourselves in a position of asking first ourselves the right questions around being able to actively listen to others, whether we agree with them or not, and then using that information to create the dialogue that you hope will change some of the behavior that you're looking to change, and or be able to live with the behavior depending on what it is. Let me be very clear here that this whole discussion is not a panacea that we'll be able to change everyone's behavior that we meet with a magic wand or clicking our heels 3 times like Dorothy to go back to Kansas. It's not that situation, because there are times with difficult behavior or challenging people that we sometimes just need to walk away, that we need to agree to disagree that it will not be fixed. But then there might be times when you have to remove yourself from that situation, and or other suggestions in terms of solutions will make themselves known. And then the third one here on non-judgmental problem solving, Explaining to people what the behavior is not good enough if you're not looking for solutions in order to change the behavior. When you have people that are all the time negative, it's important to find out what about it is negative. And sometimes this happens in a situation. I know in some of the work that I did in both executive and leadership coaching at the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco, one of the biggest challenges was the incoming millennial generation, whether they had experience in other companies before they got to us, and or whether they were coming in and learning all of their skills new. One of the biggest challenges was, from a cultural standpoint, you had a lot of people that had been at the Fed for many, many, many years. And it was a little bit difficult to make that cultural transition of learning from younger professionals and younger professionals wanting to learn everything they needed to learn to be successful in the situation that they were in. So there were oftentimes challenges. There were oftentimes resistance around support. There was oftentimes miscommunication. So it just creates the need for us to look non-judgmentally at how can we support one another, and at the same time be successful in our own right and create that success for others. So oftentimes mentoring and the additional coaching, both ways, by the way, reverse mentoring when you have younger professionals supporting the growth needs of older professionals is also an area that I am absolutely supportive of. So it's important then, under this non-judgmental and problem-solving area, that you ask yourself, how are you engaging others to work with you to problem-solve in this situation? If the difficult behavior types can often be deflected, what are the areas that you want to make sure that you work with them in order to look at your issues and their issues to make sure that you can find some solutions? And remember that oftentimes people who have difficult and challenging behavior are very good at throwing the attention on you in a negative way sometimes, which makes you defensive, but it does take that attention off of them. So you need to be clear, and that's where your ability to dialogue becomes very, very important. So let's look at a few things that I just made notes about that I'd like you to just consider moving forward. If a parent, do what you can to diffuse the emotions first and keep calm yourself, even though that's a tough one. I have been in that situation. And, you know, earlier we talked about what might be some of the environmental issues that make people difficult or challenging. I think an important environmental issue that you need to consider is that life happens for all of us. There could have been a death in their family. There could have been a relationship issue. There could have been illness with children. There could have been a major move from one city to another. These are examples of the environmental issues that can sometimes impact our ability to be either positive, negative, or to be difficult or challenging with others. So if you can diffuse the emotion, do what you can to do that, and or engage others to support you with that. Be comfortable in building rapport, empathy, and flexibility with others. Notice I have no time said, if you don't like the person, just forget it. I've never said that, because all of us are in a position to not really like some of the people that we work with. We won't break bread with them necessarily or have a beer after work with them necessarily, but it is critical that we build rapport, empathy, and flexibility so that we can work with them and be successful. And that's where your ability to think about trust, integrity, transparency comes in. Where possible, determine the root causes of the other person's behavior with dialogue. So you can ask, you know, I'm not sure where this behavior is coming from. Can we talk about it? And don't always be so quick to want to do that in public so that you believe you have others that will be on your side relative to that other person's behavior, because that can just make it even worse. You're also putting them in a very bad position, and sometimes people that are really negative, very challenging, don't forget those things. So you have to ask yourself, would I want that for me? And be very sensitive and respectful on how you come to those areas. Turn your focus to problem solving and outcomes you both want in the future. I've talked a lot about problem solving and solutions, but you got to have that conversation about what you're looking for moving forward. And then don't forget it after you've had a single conversation. Remind one another that this is what you're committed to and what you want to look at. And then again, that active listening with as little judgment as possible. Sometimes what I do after I've had situations where I'm just really seething in this conversation with this person, I'll just walk away afterward and say, you know, great, let's think about this a little bit and let's come back together and talk about it more. That gives me a chance to move away, have a little bit of self-talk with some clean air and get my own positive endorphins moving. And then maybe make a couple of notes about things that I heard that we talked about that I want to look back over, and then be okay to make that next appointment with them or the next dialogue. Hey, let's go out to Starbucks because I want to continue our conversation and I have a couple of things I wanted to run by you. And that provides that opportunity for you to continue without cutting off or changing what could have been happening, okay? And then alter your own behavior from reactive to proactive and know when to be flexible. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is that we forget that our own perceptions and thoughts about another person's behavior is at times our own behavior and the challenges that we give to others. So we have to be clear. It's almost like physician heal thyself. The physician can be very good about providing health care and good quality services to his or her patients, but sometimes they don't take very good care of themselves. So we have to be the same way. We have to acknowledge that sometimes we are that person that we have a lot of issues with, and that our ability to understand the behavior, understand what we need to do about that behavior becomes very, very important. I think the last thing I'll say about some of these is that I'd like you to consider that your need to depersonalize how someone else might be treating you, for example, is actually important to solving whatever the issues might be. And it's very easy for us to look at a person and say, wow, I can't believe that they said that about me, or wow, I take it personally that they mean X, Y, Z about me, when the reality is that it's our superimposing that information from others. So what I'd like you to consider in this case is that if you want to really reduce that personalization, try to put yourself in that other person's shoes. It's difficult, but try to put yourself in the shoes of why they might be behaving the way they are. So here's just a quick example that you might consider. Sometimes you might say to yourself, wow, it must not be easy, ... So I really like a gentleman who's written a book on communication. His name is Preston Nee, N-I is his last name. And he's got a book called How to Communicate Effectively and Handle Difficult People. And I really like that he gives you some ways to think about how to not be so reactive and be more proactive. And one of those ways is, it must not be easy, ... So here's an example. It must not be easy. My boss is really demanding, but it must not be easy to have such high expectations placed on him or her and their performance by management. Or, my child is being so resistant at school. It must not be easy to deal with his school and social pressures. So you want to put yourself in the position of what the other person might be dealing with and going through, instead of just assuming they're being difficult as if you never have been in your life, okay? And all of us, of course, have been there. So I put together just a few favorite resources for you to consider. Again, I did not do the correct, detailed notation on when these were written. You can certainly find all of them online, but these are ones that I use with both clients and other colleagues. And I find them, and sometimes I need to get my own fix on some of the issues that I'm dealing with others. And this just helps me, by the way, whether it's a spouse or whether it's other family members or clients or just friends. These are resources that I like. So People Styles at Work by Bolton. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I know a lot of you have probably heard that book by Stephen Covey. Another book by a Stanford professor, Carol Dweck, called Mindset, is a wonderful little book. The Leadership Challenge by 2 professors from Santa Clara University is one that I use and have also become a certified facilitator in, because it talks about what leaders need to do and what challenges they may be faced with either in their teams or as they move along in their journey. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. He's a consultant with his own firm right here in the Bay Area. Drive by Daniel Pink. The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. Let me just take 2 seconds on this book for a second. What I like about this is oftentimes we're not clear about what motivates others. And as a result, when difficult or challenging behavior comes up, we focus only on the behaviors instead of what would be positive motivating factors for them that could move them away from what that behavior is. And Daniel Pink does a great job in his book, but I might also recommend that you look at one of his YouTube videos that they use the RMS style in order to talk about the motivation, and it's great. It's about 15 or 20 minutes long, but it talks about what motivating factors are for us and the research that's been done on motivating, and how, if we knew more about it, we could really work harder to get people to be in a more positive state of mind, be more effective at work, be more engaged, reduce our turnover with our teams and our leaders, etc. And then the last one is a book called The Conflict Competent Leader. This book focuses on what a leader needs to do in terms of being really savvy around managing conflict. But I like to talk to team members about this, some of the concepts that they talk about in this book as well. And I think that, again, any of these can provide you with the open opportunities to think more about not only your own behaviors, things you want to work on in order to become better and more effective employees or leaders, but also things that you can do to support your colleagues and family and friends. And that's it in terms of looking at this particular topic of successfully managing challenging or difficult people, one opportunity at a time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Wow, Marvell, it was fantastic, and we're already getting such nice comments from the audience. Fantastic. Yes, let me just make sure everybody knows, I will be sending a link and the password to the webinar a little bit later today, so you'll get to refer to this anytime you need it. This was such great content. You all, if you have questions, please use the chat box, and I will pose them to Marvell. And I have a couple of my own, Marvell. When you're witnessing some behaviors or having interactions, but you have a delayed reaction to them, like, oh, wait, what was that? and it hits you, you know, 30 minutes later, like, hey, that wasn't quite right. And what do you do then? And then do you wait? So typically I just ignore it and I hope it goes away. And then sure enough, it comes around again and then again. And then now you've built up all this. So if you're a naturally delayed person with this sort of thing, do you have any advice on that?
Yes, I do. And Mary, what a great question. Here's one of the challenges. No matter how confident we are all in our work, with our family, how successful we are, there are times when this situation happens to us. And oftentimes, it takes us by surprise. We'll say, whoa, wait a minute, was I just insulted? We smile and say, wow, was I just insulted? Did that person just humiliate me or embarrass me in front of others? And we say to ourselves, whoa, yes, they did, and what am I going to do about it? So for me, I think there's a couple or three things. You hit it right on the head. Do you know your own style and how you behave in those situations? And you said, normally in those situations, you know, I try to ignore it and maybe it'll go away. But here it comes back again and again. Oftentimes with difficult people or challenging people or people that might be negators, et cetera, they will often take that opportunity to come back to you because you did nothing about it. You rolled over and played dead, and it must have been okay for them to humiliate you or say some disrespectful comment. But I'm okay to walk away from that rather than to escalate it in terms of my own emotional hurt or pain. But I will come back. And what I have to do before I come back is look at the entire situation that led up to that comment that they made. Or what if they lost their temper and exploded at me? I need to be able to look at all of it. One was I asked myself the question, gosh, did I cause that person to do that? It goes back to what I said from Preston Nee by looking at, can I put myself in that person's position and say, whoa, it must not be easy for that person to have their whole team taken away from them, and now they're an individual contributor. So I might use some of that when I go back to them, and I'll make this situation up. You know what, Carl? I'm sure that it must not be easy for you to work in a new team when you had a larger team that you worked with before. I may start right there, very calm, et cetera. And then I will say, but I do believe that it was not appropriate for you to be disrespectful and lose your temper with me when I'm just one of your team members. So let's talk about what was your concern and why you felt it was necessary for you to go down that path. Now, my heart is beating 50,000 beats a minute. I'm about to hyperventilate, but I have to put myself in a controlled space, and I have to practice in advance what I want to say. But I can't let it go more than, gosh, no more than 24 hours, and even that's a little long. It may be, if it happened in the morning, I'll circle back to them in the afternoon. Now, here's the thing I won't do. I won't just send them an email. And the reason is, it's very easy for us to interpret that email any way we want. And that includes that it's more negative, it's more hateful, it's disrespectful. Please don't put an exclamation point or in red or bold, because then it's easy for it to literally go off the deep end. So there has to be dialogue without interruptions. If they refuse to talk to you that time, then make sure you bring it back again. That's when I might send an email after one or two tries to say, hey, Carl, I really am very concerned about the last time we met in person, and I need to have a conversation with you about it. Please let me know when you're available. Does that help, Mary?
It does. It's very, very helpful. And I think your 24-hour rule is spot on, because, boy, if you wait after that, it gets easier just to keep waiting, and then you just don't do anything about it.
But then it impacts your relationship with them moving forward as well.
That's true. Yes, very good. If you're on the receiving end of receiving the feedback, how do you, what is your definition of the difference between being defensive and providing an explanation?
Okay. So I think you mean if the other person is defensive.
Well, no, let's say, well, either way, I guess. It could go either way. If you're on the receiving end of the feedback and you feel like you need to provide an explanation as to why XYZ, happened or why you reacted a certain way. Well, how far do you go with that when you're always, you don't want to sound defensive. However, you do have a point of view.
Yes, you do. So let's say we're in I'll make it up again, let's say we're in a staff meeting and there's a couple of people or maybe this one person who's not shouting you down, but when you bring up situations, they say, oh, no, we've tried that before, it doesn't work, or, oh, no, that's not a good idea, et cetera, et cetera. So that's when I need to take a deep breath and say, well, hold on just a second, Bob. I understand that these might have been areas that you've tried, but I want to make sure that we all have an opportunity to weigh in on what this situation might be. I need to deflect that it's all about me in that situation first. If they attack me, however, then again, I want to be in a position of saying, well, Bob, actually, I don't think that your attacking behavior is appropriate in this situation, and I really do find it offensive, and I'd like us to stay on an even keel and talk about the situation or talk about the points that are on the table now. So they need to know that their behavior is inappropriate, and in this sense, however the words come to you, it's not appropriate, won't be tolerated, and we need to focus back, whether you're the team leader or not in that situation, so that you don't go down the path of being, well, wait a minute, I've got good ideas too. How come I can't bring them up? I don't want to get into a match with them, whether it's shouting or just ideas, where it just disintegrates into something that then makes me look almost as bad as that offending person to the rest of my group. I have to be careful on that too, you see. Now, again, we're all human though, right? And I certainly don't want to get into a screaming match or because people will only remember the last thing they saw, and that could have been my behavior as opposed to the other person's behavior when I was reacting to that behavior of the other person.
Mark, I'm just in awe. You have such great insights. Was there something about this topic in particular that piqued your interest so much that you've studied it in such depth and become such an expert on it? I'm just wondering if there's a certain point in your life where you thought, wow, this is something I'd really like to study more, and I'm wondering if you could share that with us.
Well, well, first of all, for me, when a topic grabs me, that topic is almost like a pit bull. It won't let me go. So this is one, change is another, also looking at how we influence one another. All those things are areas that I believe on a regular, everyday basis, we have to deal with them, particularly in the technological world that we're in now. But with difficult people, I oftentimes found myself feeling like I was a wimp, and I let people roll over me and didn't have anything to say about it. And I had to start looking and be more observant of others. Hey, they were just like me. They're smart. They have good ideas. But look, they rolled over. And no one heard those good ideas because then they reduced themselves into their shell and then became bitter and then became negative and then let that negative behavior explode. I never have been in a situation where my life has been one of negativity. I've always seen the glass as half full. I learned so much from my mother on how to manage even the most difficult situation. You fall down and break your leg like I did, and I tripped when I was skiing, broke my leg. The good in that was I had 6 months to relax and think about other things I wanted to do, even though I couldn't do anything else because I was wearing a hip cast. But it would have been very easy to do the woe is me situation with that. So I believe that because we're all difficult and challenging at some time, and we can be, you know, a blankety blank to others, we need to be a little bit more sensitive and put in our own sweat equity to make sure that we're supporting others as they need as well.
Exactly, exactly. I love this question we've received. Any advice for people who hate conflict?
Yeah, yeah. So here's my first advice for you if you hate conflict. Learn about conflict and then embrace conflict. And I know that's going to make people faint right over the phone, okay? But here's the reason why. One of the reasons we avoid and hate conflict is because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. That's number one. Number two, we don't know if we're going to be able to support those outcomes. Conflict is not always bad. Good conflict allows ideas to surface from others that you may have never thought about. If we smash or squelch conflict, good things don't come to the surface. We don't hear from others about their experiences because we just want to make sure that there's no conflict. Here's the other thing that I would recommend. Take a look at what's important for you for conflict, and I would recommend an assessment, a self-assessment that you can do online. probably the recommendation would be to work with one of your learning and development professionals and maybe do sessions on conflict management and conflict reduction, and do this, the TKI assessment, which is the Thomas Kilmann Instrument, TKI, T-Tom, K-King, I-India, Thomas Kilmann Instrument. It asks you a bunch of questions, and then it gives you a report, and it talks about the various styles of conflict. Knowing what your conflict style is and how to mitigate it, by the way, it gives you lots of show-and-tell examples. I use that assessment with my clients and my leadership development clients, too, because I want them to consider, just because they're the leader, they are not always in charge, one, and it's not always their way or the highway just because they're the leader. They need to know how to be flexible and work with different styles around how we look at conflict. So that would be one that I would consider first. The second thing is to start talking to people that you know and trust their feedback to you, so that you can say to them, hey, I'm a little nervous about going into that meeting. I'm making this up now, because I think that there's going to be people who are not going to like my ideas, and then there's going to be conflict, and then I'll run out of the room. No, in advance, you need to be very clear how you're going to manage that conflict and what you're going to do about it. So if Bob or Mary brings up blah, 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 then here are the couple of things I will ask them about their concerns rather than to just give them a defensive answer. Okay? So sometimes we need to engage people in the dialogue rather than to tell them this is the way it's going to be. Lastly, if people see you as one who is hating conflicts, runs from conflict, it's going to be very difficult for them to see you taking charge in a meeting, taking charge as a leader, becoming a leader, and not just a worker bee. If they see you as being happy to just be in the background, there's no way for you to grow those leadership and management skills. There's no way, and you have to do that trial by fire at times too. It's not always nice. There are times when you need to have that struggle with conflict and then have those dialogues afterward with how you're going to manage it. Hope that helps.
Yes, very much so. Are there other self-awareness resources that are your favorites that you haven't already mentioned today?
Well, of course, another assessment that I use with clients as well is the Talent SMART, all one word, Talent, cap T, cap S, all one word, the Talent SMART Emotional Intelligence Assessment I also use. One of the reasons that I like that assessment is because self-awareness is, as I said, the foundation of emotional intelligence, and emotionally intelligent leaders are the most successful. So that assessment not only gives you a report, gives you some feedback, show and tell, but you can use their resources for life. That's what I like about it. So if I took the assessment this month, I could turn around and use it 5 years from now and with the same information and at least see where I've grown.
Great. I will mention both of those in my follow-up email to everyone today, the TKI and also the Talent SMART. So you can refer to those a little bit later on. We have one more question. What if you can't say something to someone who behaved badly because of political reasons?
Okay, so that's a great question, too. So very quickly, and I know we're just about at 11 o'clock, there's a couple of things I would do with that. If I know that I can't say something to them because of political reasons, I'm going to engage my network. Your ability to influence inside an organization and find out where your allies are, not like it's a battle, though. That isn't what I mean. But find out where your allies are and get those people confidentially. You need to ask for confidentiality to help you with managing the relationship between that person. But remember, there's a fine balance between they're behaving badly and it's directed at you, and you can't say something politically, maybe they're because they have higher positional power. Fine balance between that and the fact that they're doing so illegally. So that's why you need to engage. Is it HR that you need to engage? Is there a colleague that you have who might be a peer to this person that you trust and can have a conversation with them about this? Confidentially, again, you need to always physically ask for confidentiality. Don't assume they're going to give it because they're a friend. And then ask them, tell them what your situation is, and not ask them just for advice. Tell them, well, what I believe I need to do is X, Y, Z. What are your thoughts? So give them something to work with, that you've already thought about it, you've already seen that there might be a couple of things that you think are important, and then engage them in that discussion with you. And then go from there in terms of what solutions might be like. And you talk to them about solutions. Let me be clear. People leave companies and they leave bosses. They leave company oftentimes because of their bosses or because of colleagues in the workplace that they just can't work with, difficult or challenging people. So to what extent does it matter to you that the company is where you want to be, but the situation is not so good?
Excellent. Marvell, I just can't thank you enough. I think this has just been an excellent, webinar, and we've received so many nice comments already. So thank you very much for sharing your time with us today. Yes.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Before we sign off, I want to just tell you all about a few upcoming events. Our next webinar is September 6th, the first Wednesday of September, Stepping Up Your Success Strategy with Jennifer Blair. Jennifer will help you end the year on a very positive note so that you ace your end-of-year review. So September, we've got a few months left in the year. What can you do now to make sure that you end the year on a successful note? So be sure to sign up and tune into that webinar. And we have some great in-person events. Deborah Tannen, you may remember she wrote the book, You Just Don't Understand, Women and Men in Conversation many years ago. She sort of opened up the whole conversation about the differences in communication styles between men and women. She's written a new book called You're the Only One I Can Tell, Inside the Language of Women's Friendships. So we have her 2 nights in August 15th in San Jose at Deloitte, and the next night, August 16th, in San Francisco at Fitbit. So we would love for you all to join us for one of those. These are on our website, so you can sign up anytime. We have Joanne Loveland coming up in September. She's written a wonderful book called Earning It, Lessons Learned from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. And our Entrepreneur Conference is coming up October 17th at Fenwick and West again. We've got Stacy Philpott-Brown, the CEO of TaskRabbit, is our keynote, and also Amy Chang of Accompany. And then we'll have the day filled with lots of great panels and breakout sessions. So we do hope that you'll join us for that. Even if you're happy in your corporate job, there's still lots of ways to learn and apply entrepreneurial skills to your job. Last but not least, spend the weekend with us. We have a Watermark weekend for women at 1440 Multiversity in Scotts Valley. I went there this past weekend to check it out. It's absolutely beautiful. It's nestled among the redwood trees, very peaceful. We have Abigail Stassen, who's another wonderful facilitator of ours, who will be talking about the conscious leader. So you'll get some leadership development skills and just a wonderful weekend of organic food and hiking and fellowship and quiet. It's a wonderful place. So check that out as well. You'll find it on our website. All right, you all, thank you so much. This has been a recorded webinar. I will follow up with an email shortly. And everyone, please have a great day. Thank you.